Hello, and welcome to Cybility Savvy. I'm your host, Michala Liavaag, and today we're going to talk with Pradeep U.N, the founder and CEO of Stories and Wisdom, and we'll home in on how stories and wisdom can help to create trust, build psychological safety, and transform your organization's culture.
Cybility Savvy, the quickest way to go from cyber confused to cyber savvy.
Hi, Pradeep. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, and I'm really glad to be here. I'm the CEO of the Stories and Wisdom company, where we are changing the way the world thinks about human engagement and culture transformation with our neuroscience-backed approach. I know that's a mouthful, but at its core, it's a card game that you can bring people together and have a discussion around, share personal stories. And as you hear stories, react with each other. The whole thing is playable on any browser and any device, can be done at communities, homes, but more importantly, teams, organizations around the world, even if your team is elsewhere. A little bit about myself. I'm a compulsive storyteller with, I would say, a data and analytics problem. And when I'm not helping communities or organizations reinvent themselves with stories, you'll find me exploring new ideas, mentoring young creatives, or braiding hair and playing with my first grade twin girls. I see life as an adventure. I'm all about sharing the best parts with, some fun, humor, sprinkle of insight.
Okay, so thank you for that. Obviously, nowadays you are CEO of your own company. Is this something that you always wanted to be? Just talk me through how you got here.
The fact of it is, right, is there are parts of the role which is extremely exciting, and that's what I think people go with, like, I want to be a CEO. But there are others which are absolutely not. And then I'll go a little bit deeper, right? There's some of the hands for me which are not preferable, tends to be accounting, taxes, and so forth. I'm like, oh, I'll get somebody who's actually better at this, and then they can do that. And then there are parts of it which for me are pretty exciting, which is in terms of the vision, the actual product design, and talking to customers and understanding what they are trying to see, and then try to help with them in terms of solutions. But eventually, my journey has always been centered around, I was a very the buck stops here kind of a person. If somebody's looking for an answer, I can actually provide them. And to have that the buck stops here kind of an approach, then you wear multiple hats, and you always have to have your hands very dirty. So if people want to do that, then I would say, like, CEO would be an avenue to strive for.
Let's just cast your mind back like to when you're like 5 years old. What did you want to be when you grew up back then?
For sure, don't remember my 5-year-old, but I can tell you, even till my high school, even partially, even undergrad, almost everybody had a sense of here's what they would want to do. Mine was, yep, I want to do that. Yes, yes. I had a more list of yeses, which did not put me in a box, even though I was in engineering school. I was like, sure, I like parts of engineering, and I absolutely hate these parts of engineering school. But I couldn't really see myself as an engineer box. Because I was in engineering school doing music. I started a music band, and then I also did business competitions where over a weekend we learned accounting, and then because we had to write the business plan for it, so there were parts of it where, like, I have no idea what it is. So we bought a few books from the library and just literally started writing income statements and business plan projections. I was very comfortable with not knowing what I wanted to be. I was very, I don't know, but I'll explore. And I kept exploring. So I got into multiple adventures that way.
Yeah, I really love that because one of the things that, I speak about with my mentees is while cybersecurity is like a huge field with lots of disciplines that you can focus in on, you kind of want to sample the menu, as it were, don't you, to find out what you like, what you're passionate about, before just like going, no, I'm doing this,
I did go deep, but I was never like laser focused on one thing. I was much better at bringing people together.
Yeah.
So I would have these multiple set boxes that I was trying to explore, but then I would have people who loved to go significantly deeper, and I would bring them together and then connect the dots. Because I didn't try to do it myself, because I know no way am I going to compete and get better than this individual. So I can't say like I was deep in any one of those. I was deep enough to engage and then debate a little bit. But eventually it comes down to trusting the people who know what they're doing. And even with cybersecurity, it's the same thing. Like, I know enough to trust somebody else who's going to do a much better job that I would not attempt to even do.
What would you say from, this experience of like bringing these different people together? So, what would you say are your kind of main lessons that have come out of that for you?
Whatever you're trying to do, just put one step at a time. Just keep going in the direction you believe will take you there. And if it doesn't really end up with the destination you thought, well, that's where entrepreneurs have this magical word called a pivot. Just say like, oh, we had a pivot moment, and then you move on.
What challenges, if we think about the working life at the moment and your journey to discovering stories and wisdom, what sort of hurdles did you face that kind of eventually led you to creating this?
Lots of it that I can talk through. Because stories and wisdom is actually like a six-year journey, but it's been just a year since I actually founded it. Just getting down to that's the structure we want to enable took a lot of research: neuroscience, psychology, ethnography, education, and then design to get there, test it out, then the technology to eventually make that in a way in which we'd get there. So there was lots of pivots there.
I'd just like to go back a little bit. So you've explained, what stories and wisdom is for people and how it can sort of help. But when was it you what was that aha moment you recognized it was a problem that you could solve?
In the middle of the pandemic. So I had initially gotten a structure of stories and wisdom for a use case around customer discovery. And so I'll talk about two moments. The second one is a pivot. First one was there's this methodology called the Challenger Sales Methodology. There's a book about it, and the company that I was working at that point, they were pretty much on that new journey of like every salesperson who should be challenging the customers instead of note taking or taking orders. Like challenge the customer in terms of, do they believe they're running their company the best of their ability in this approach? Challenge them on it. Challenge them that they are going to be the best in the industry. Challenge them on it. Like that is what that company wanted to engage their salespeople to do. And then I talked to the salespeople, and they were like, "We don't want to do that. The customers are going to sign, the license renewals, and I'll make my number. Why am I changing the way I do it? Because I'll make my number. Eventually, I'm getting rewarded based on the numbers I make or don't make." Then there were folks who wanted to do the shift, but then they were afraid that they didn't have the skills and they did not trust themselves to grow that. And there were that group, and the other went with like, this doesn't make sense, I'm out of here. Right? So there was these three buckets. So let's talk about the second bucket. And they didn't have the skills. And the usual way of doing L&D, learning development courses, tends to be, learn this, here's the method, here's a template, here's your cheat sheet, here's your card, here's a few videos. No one remembers that, but that's the method. And I was looking at like, that wouldn't work. And to me, that was the stories and wisdom, like customer discovery. Let's actually enable those prompts, and the cards challenge the customers, because now you're not being rude or challenging. You say, that's not me, that's the card. And people also open up, because you're not talking about the weather, the sports team, the kids. You're just going to like, hey, I believe the biggest frustration I have in my role is, and then somebody says operations, and then like, hey, tell me more. That's all you have to do. Everything else is card driven. So suddenly they were sharing problems that would take expensive workshops and multiple months and sales planning decks to get to. They could do that. That was the nugget. That was the idea that I was trying to solve for. First hurdle met there was the salespeople who I had built this for, and I tested it. They said, you want me to play a card game with my C-level executives? I said, yes. They said, not happening. I had actually, before I went to the sales team, I had actually tried all of this with my C-level executives who are customers already. I had already tried this with, again, if they think about a large telecom company in the US, I probably worked with them. Think of a large retail company there. I worked with them. Like these were individuals that I had already brought in, and I had used the words, okay, guys, we're going to be talking about AI. And they're like, oh, here we go again. And I said, we're going to play this game. We're going to play a game to talk about AI. And this was in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, yep, we're going to play a game. Here are the rules. Here's your rules. Here's what you do. And what they said was, okay, I have a question. Is it my turn or his turn? That was it. Immediate compliance. I had done all that work to eventually get to the salespeople who said, have you ever been a sales guy? And I said, nope, true statement. And they said, well, why am I listening to you?
Yeah, I just think it's absolutely fascinating how the thing about games, is everyone knows, a game will have rules and people expect you to say them. And then again, they just engage. And I think a lot of people, and as you just illustrated, kind of forget that, yeah, they might be C-level execs, but they're still human beings, and
Exactly.
human beings like play. I think that was a great example, of what you've just sort of done there. So, yeah, tell me about the next one then with the pivot.
So summer 2019, George Floyd got murdered in the Midwest in the US. So this is an African American by police. On that date, in the company that I was working in, we had a team meeting on literally that day, where when the news was coming out, and this was an African American VP who was leading the call, who's usually on like, okay, what are the numbers we're making, and then literally getting down to that level of discussion. He was just all over the place, and then talking about what I felt was a complete rant. It was fundamentally what I think he was reflecting on was institutional racism, and just the systemic nature with which this is continuously happening, and it's just an ongoing thing, and then having a reflection of growing up and everything else. Now, still then, my take on all of that was just like, but which is, as an immigrant coming into the US, coming in, you try to understand what the patterns, what are the things there, a little bit of history. So from my data point, I'm like, unfortunate, but it has happened throughout for centuries. Unfortunately, it continues to happen. So why is this different that it is so being talked about? Because we've never talked about this for another group or anything else with this much. It was my initial take on it. But then you start seeing Paris riots happening literally a couple of days after. And so like, this was an event in the Midwest suddenly making into a global thing. And internally within the company, we were now having groups of, we need to learn more, we need to understand. And that was predominantly from the white community and leadership to engage. And then I immediately went to the Black community within our employee resource groups, and then try to understand. And that was I would have expected, leaning in, so like, okay, here's what, let me help you. But the opposite was going. I was like, why am I teaching you now? Why do I have to share? Like, it was a very us versus them kind of in pain. And it was the leaning in. I was just like, well, too late. And was the approach they were going. And it was, there was a sense of blame and engagement. And I was just like, whoa, this is a melting pot where people want to have the conversation, but they just cannot figure out how to have the conversation. And for me, I'm going, this needs a structured discussion system design. That's where my mind goes. I see areas, I go integral calculus, I look at this and I go, I need a system design. Guess what? That customer discovery where customers did not know how to say, here's the product I need you to build, but I can talk about my problems. I can pivot and reuse here. But this could be in the context of civil rights. So if you're talking about promotion, now the conversation would be like, well, if I was white, I could have probably been promoted 3 years ago, but I wasn't. Or because I'm Black, now I'll have to have this bar, whereas this bar is good enough for most. And if you're colored, like, yep, welcome to my life. Like literally, I can give descriptions for my story that way as immigrant and as a person of color, and then go into that. But I know I'm still a guy, and suddenly, like, even sharing that leads to others to go like, Me too. I'm with you. And now you go like, wait a second, that is what all of us are facing. Is one, you're able to have the conversation. Alex at the other side, and like, oh yeah, you do have a higher bar when people who have certain level of privilege start to engage. And that kind of discussions, when you start sharing it with a perspective, I'm not saying that's a right perspective, it's just my perspective, can lead to more people going like, oh my God, I thought it was just me. That was the huge pivot. And suddenly that discussion that now opened up stories and wisdom to like D&IB, other perspectives, opinions, which is exactly what it was with customers. But now in this case, and now you start seeing the different perspectives opens up a lot of other opportunities, which again, I'll bring it back on theme, security. There's a lots of perspectives on what can be secure or not from different perspectives. Where's the data stored? How is it stored? What is secure for you versus secure for me? And is it good enough? There's certain perspectives in this that we need to have a discussion around and then validate depending on our future. So
Yeah.
two pivots, a lot of hurdles in there that I was just talking you through.
Actually, it's really interesting to hear, how you recognized that you could translate what you had with the customer service side into this problem. In terms of recognition of this different approach and then taking that then into, let's say, the corporate world around organizational transformation and this sort of thing, how did you kind of come to that?
Well, that was to me the next adjacent space, because post George Floyd murder and then how I was actually pivoting into this conversation, that took off internally in this large company that I was part of. By end of the week, since we pivoted, we had a few thousand engaging people playing it again and again. An entire org, a regional org, had gone through, and then I was just like, guys, this is just a demo. But they were just like, no, 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 this is, we need to do this. And we had gone to that kind of pace where this was just a side something that I was exploring, and it just took off, and we were just doing demos. That's when we knew that we were onto something, but it's not like I planned and then I went and did it. It just went there within that week.
And one of the things that I'm very mindful of is that people would be kind of looking at me and thinking, well, hold on a minute, what's this got to do with cybersecurity? That's HR's job. And I was just having a conversation the other day actually with a facilitator who works in organizational transformation. And I was explaining that ultimately what we're trying to do is keep people safe, and that requires people to change their behavior. And changing behavior is a transformative thing. So
Yes.
therefore, it comes back to the same sort of things around, behavioral science, the neuroscience, all of this stuff. And so I don't feel like it's as far apart as people perhaps first think. So what's your take in terms of, how it can apply to cybersecurity? Because I know I've also got my view.
No, I absolutely agree on your perspective on this, right? So there are multiple parts to cybersecurity, and the easy parts are the technology parts. The somewhat harder parts are the process parts, but the really hard parts are the people parts. And usually that right there is where your security problems are. The technology and all of it is something that happened on the people side. And then when you're trying to change the habits of people, then you can change the behavior of the collective, but then it's habits of people. And many of these habits might have social connotations to it, perceived social connotations to it, because it might not be actually true. And if you change the social structure, again, the perceptions can change. And that's multiple age, gender, race, backgrounds. If somebody is calling you on a phone, do you pick it up? If somebody's coming through and sending an email, do you click that link? And I goes like, of course you do. And I'm like, no, you don't. Even if it looks like I sent you that email with that link, do I really send you an email with a link normally? I'm like, no, you don't, but it's from you. I'm like, well, I never do. Therefore, it's not me. That's phishing right there. That habit having discussions with C-level executives in terms of, well, here's an embarrassing moment for me, and then they shared, and I'll go, shit, I thought that only happened to me. Meaning you're literally saying that happened. Don't let it happen to you is something you can have a discussion with. Otherwise, it's just like, that was my big failure part in when I was running it, is one way to take it. But it's like, it just happens to people. It's a human thing. But if you start sharing those, now you have enabled that kind of awareness to others in terms of several others. But more stories come in where we get to be stronger. That has nothing to do with technology. It's kind of processy, but then it's really around people, unlocked by stories, by sharing, allowing somebody to share their vulnerable spot. The stories and being vulnerable, sharing with each other, can unlock so many other viewpoints, especially in a space like cybersecurity, because it's there's just too many things going on. Like there's like, are you talking about online? Are you talking about mobile? Are you talking about encryption? Are you talking about access control? Like there's levels and levels of it, but then the real chaotic stuff is people.
Do you want to maybe just share for the audience a little bit about what the story actually does, from a neuroscience point of view in our brain, and why that's so, why it makes this so important as an approach?
Stories light up more parts of your brain. The way we've been educated and taught, using, we shall use data, we shall use percentages and all that, that lights up the Wernicke part of your brain, and there's a few parts that's light up. But stories light up significantly more parts of the brain. And as you light up more parts of the brain, then recall memory starts to come in. Now, I'm not saying stories don't use data. I'm saying stories and data. That lights up the maximum number of parts of your brain, and therefore it's more memorable. Like literally you can recall it, and then you can attempt to make a few changes. Now, that is just in terms of recall, because it was told with a certain story. There is still the habit that influences my behavior. And that is where, when you start to do stories in groups, there's some level of synchronization where you're telling your story, and then others try to understand, but then they understand it within their own narrative structure and background. So now there are 3 or 4 stories on that little instance that is now reinforcing, or in some cases even debating against each other for you to figure out what I should do. Like that is you formulating, here's what I might want to do. So that is what stories start to do. Now, when you start adding on top of it gamification, now we start bringing in chemicals and hormones with dopamine. But gamification is just a design structure. So think about any game that you have played, whether it's a card game or a board game. There are first roles or a context with which you're brought in. Like, here's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be building property, and that's monopoly. And then we're going to be competing for that, or we're going to be running kingdoms, and then we shall start to see if this kingdom can beat that, and that could be D&D, but that could also be chess, like something like that. That is what we're doing. We're going to be competing, and we set up. So then there's roles, like what is your role, and then how are you going to be bringing that in with some constraints. So with stories and wisdom, we bring all of that into a card game, but then it's customized. But there's roles and structure that sets it up. Now, any game that you played, you very quickly go with, like, you're playing the role and the game and the opponent. Now, if I ask you, what's the gender of that person? What's the color of the person? What's the age? And you go like, well, how does that matter? Like, that's exactly how it should be in the world, but that's exactly not how the world runs. A game design suddenly saying somebody with more experience in this, somebody who taught me, somebody of a age and authority even, starts to feel they're equal and can actually get an outcome that is fair when they work hard for it. That right there is what a true gamified design can allow you to do. So with that kind of a game, when you actually play and experience that in a group, whether you win or not, dopamine starts to kick in, because now you're having a feel good, and then a feel good hormone, which also leads towards some level of, okay, you got some, like each time you win a resource, or you got a new discovery card that actually helps you move forward. Those are all feel good hormones that you're immediately getting some level of dopamine kick-ins coming in. I worked hard and I got this card. But even if you don't win, by doing that regularly, that group brings in oxytocin. which is a bonding hormone. It is a trust hormone. It is a love hormone too. So when you're having these kind of gamified experiences with stories, then your team starts to bond, and then they can have deeper discussions. And in the space of cybersecurity, now they might be talking about, I'm not sure about this, or I did this wrong, but then we were still safe. But let's talk about it. Like that you need some level of psychological safety to figure out. So those, when you start putting all of those together, now, which is storytelling and gamification, it gets even more amplified. The social learning is, of course, the how I learn from each other, but it's very organic. It's values based. That's what gamification starts to do. And every time you engage, you learn new things, and you have to be open to it. And in cybersecurity, similar way, like when you come together and have same discussion with stories and wisdom on cybersecurity, you'll be sharing even similar experiences, but with a new light that you didn't know was going to happen. Only the group in that moment will uncover a few things that will be valuable to that group moving forward. So that's social learning in action.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I was on a call the other day and with some other information security professionals, and one of the things we were talking about is the fact that as an industry, that there are, I suppose, pockets that are good for sharing, but generally speaking, we're not very good at it. When the conversations as well, how can we get better at this? And obviously, I'm biased because I love games and everything. So I personally think, that this could be a really great way of unlocking all that kind of knowledge and the stories and the things that have happened to individuals in relation to cybersecurity that perhaps they've not been able to open up about before. Then they get that kind of forum to be able to share in that, as you talked about, that safe way, in a way that others can then tap into, which will then often, thinking about some sessions I've run with stories and wisdom, what often happens is it unlocks things that people have forgotten. That, I think, again, it is a really powerful thing for people. No
Yeah,
question.
absolutely. It's kind of like a soft journaling. Whereas with stories and wisdom, you're forced to tell a story about here and now within a certain context that is your personal story. So it's kind of soft journaling in one way, that to do that kind of conversation openly with others, you'll have to now bring it into a narrative form that can be shared, which journaling actually lets you do. But that requires a lot more discipline. So this kind of gets into it. At that group level now, if everybody's sharing those stories, now you have a sense of journaling for the group or the organization of like, here is the members and their journeys, and how are we moving forward together as a result of that, or what are the journeys we'll have to accommodate or discuss a bit more, and then talk about the trade-offs maybe, which normally you would not get to. So there's the discovery piece, but there's also self-discovery piece and reflection, and then some level of let's figure out how we can move forward. And of course, over time, then the wisdom platform starts to help you get to like, hey, here's some insights we're seeing across groups over time that can lead you to maybe new strategies, new processes, new policies to start engage. But it's also a very interesting health check that you can do at a regular point. Like, where's my culture at? So we put in a lot of science, but the front of it is very touchy feely, and but the back end of it is very structured, analytic, AI driven, sentiment analysis kind of work.
So one of the things that really struck me about the experience of playing this was that you have these like reactions, that the 4 reactions that people can take as I'm telling the story. I don't think I really realized until those reactions are coming in that very first time what it means to be heard when you see something like light up saying, I agree, that kind of me too, or one of the reactions is around learn something new. So yeah, just perhaps tell us a little bit more about the reaction side of the platform.
So there was this paper written by the U.S. Surgeon General and his team, Dr. Vivek Murthy, and this was around the epidemic of loneliness. And in that paper, eventually it comes down to like the way to solve for this is to create a culture of connection. We started to read through like what are the elements of a culture of connection, and it is around being seen and having a sense of you're connected, you're supported, you're proud. So the you are being seen, it could be by respected, you're rewarded, or you're recognized. Like that is all you're being seen, but you're being seen is at the lower form of it. Then connected, that could be with positive interactions, supported so that you can lead a full life, proud of your life, family, aligned purpose with your work, etc. And we were like, okay, all that is great for a pillar. What can I practice? Because all of that is like, and even in allyship, you take these trainings, they're like, oh, be an ally, be empathetic. And I'm like, how? Like that kind of practical things is where we want to get to. Like, how can you be seen, connected, is what we wanted to get to. And the way it worked in a gamified structure was first prompting somebody to open up and share something that's vulnerable. Immediately you're getting down to like they're testing the psychological safety in that group, and they needed to be seen and heard. And the reactions, the first thing they do is like, you're being seen and we're giving you this. It's an act that you're going to be doing. Everyone gets to react in these ways. There is no dislike. There is no you're full of BS. There is no devil's advocate. I have a story to share, like which happens in real interactions in a regular basis. We don't have those. We just have you learned something new, or I'm pausing to reflect. I'm with you, or I'm inspired to act. Reaction. So that act of just giving a reaction, that's a learning. Like when we do our workshops, that takes a while for people to even start to do, because they're not used to just giving a reaction. They're used to giving stories, but there's no reaction. So this is like, I'm being heard on your terms. I mean, I'm listening, but you're being heard on your terms. We don't do that. We usually like, I'm listening so that I can tell a story is what normally happens. That's a whole different habit shift. So the act of giving a reaction is something that we first have to unlearn, then relearn, and we do that. Now for the other person to get those reactions, first up, changes the chemicals in your brain, because now you're being heard. Immediately dopamine kicks out. But then sometimes, even if depending on the thoughts, oxytocin also hits in, and then there's the bonding, and then the support love hormone, that is oxytocin, also hits up, because now you're saying, I got 3, I'm with you, and I thought that crap only happened to me, and I feel so lonely. And you're like, 3? And you might go like, tell me more. And then when they start telling you, you might go like, geez, that's worse than mine. And suddenly you just got this de-escalated. What you thought was going to happen, and somebody says a story which is even worse, and I'm like, geez, what am I talking about with my problem? So you're being heard, and you add perspectives. So, but the part where you start to now lean in, because the person who's telling the story does not always get to lead. So you're getting the data, which is in terms of reactions, and you now leaning in with curiosity, so that you're not held to your own personal story. So you go in and like, I'm curious about why, about the 3, I'm with you. Now you're handing the floor back, but still on your terms. It's still your story that led to these reactions now, which you are now leaning in with curiosity to now say, okay, share your story, which is an addendum to mine. So the reactions is a huge part of stories and wisdom. I know I talk about the wisdom and stories, but the reactions is the part that connects people even more and solidifies it. That is the core that actually forges the outcomes. The reactions and the follow-up discussions that ensues is where the team starts to help each other out or discover new things.
Yeah, that's definitely been my experience of that as well. So I'm just thinking of a particular session where the reactions unlocked something in an organization that they had no idea about, even though the individuals spoke to each other every day. One of the areas as well that I think is really interesting for the stories part as well as the wisdom part is think about like not-for-profits in the UK, charities, how the focus is on impact. what impact are we making? How are we doing? And by using something like this game, that's another way of drawing out those stories to help illustrate the impact that people are having. So for me, I think that's also quite an interesting angle. So, I mean, what's next for you and the platform?
For the next couple of years, we are starting to help explore suicide prevention. On the other, completely other angle, we are also going to explore an exclusive experience, a very like Napa Valley is like this huge wine region in California. So we're thinking about like a stories and wisdom Napa experience, for example. So what if you actually bring people in for a half a day? You're at the winery, run wines and stuff, and you're going to be playing rounds. Only each round is paired with a certain grape vintage and a drink. So you're going to be having taste. You're doing wine tasting flights with stories and wisdom at a winery at Napa. Is something where you're bringing people together for a bonding experience in a context where there's sun, valley, mountains, open, and you're just having discussion. So it's innovation driven, or it is some kind of problem resolution. Let's bring us together as two companies merging, or a conference where we are having about talking about important problems and we want to get together, like that kind of thing.
So thank you, Pradeep, for sharing all these wonderful stories with me and, sharing as well a little bit about what's coming up next. What I always ask people is, would you like to share three things for our listeners? Some people choose books, some choose movies. What were your three things?
Well, I'll go with the people that I would have dinner with, I guess. First one is Walt Disney, and just in terms of the the kind of enterprise, I mean, creativity and all of that, but then really at the core, founder enterprise taking an idea forward. That's one part that I'd have a discussion around. But also in his time horizon, that's when there was a world war, and parts of Disney is also how, like in the US, there was Mickey Donald related work in which he brought the civilians to actually start to join the war. So, like, to be part of the zeitgeist where the government now says, okay, I need you to help influence, and the storytelling is the core to get behavioral change. And you can now very quickly go, like, oh, I see why Walt Disney. So it's not so much just the work that we would know. It's not the theme parks and the movies. It's just the scaled influence at which impact can be done. Then second one I would say is it's Lorenzo de Medici, somebody who's born into a very rich family with a lot of money. That's so what can you do with that? Well, you can do a lot of stuff. But however, he started bringing in thinkers who are cutting edge of different disciplines to Florence to go in, and suddenly you start having boom renaissance, like within a very short period of time, an influential piece of work, not just in art, not just in sculpture, but or poetry, but then a whole lot of other things, including engineering and the scientific. This thing about creating a nucleus around which visionary thinkers can be given a safe haven to explore and engage and interact. The third one is a bit more contemporary, but is Robin Williams. But the effervescent, bubbly facade and just the pace at which that brain works and connects dots, in which you go, like, that was intelligent and genius level, and I didn't make that connection, but I like to understand the system structure behind which that comes at that pace. But all of these, if you can see, like, summary, I'm looking at explosive innovation happening with some level of structure, where it scales in terms of impact.
Yeah, no, that's actually a dinner table that I think I'd quite like to invite myself along to as well. So what would you like our listeners to take away from this and do?
I would actually want your listeners, have them go deep on being that hub, and figure out if stories and wisdom make sense for them, and then if they would at the very least be a facilitator where they're bringing in that conversation for their next level of up. And it could be in any top customer ideation and to innovation, diversity, equity, career discussions, like cybersecurity, all the way to even suicide prevention and family discussions and so forth. So it could be really anything. It's about being the hub, enable that discussion and come together. Like and going back to my dinner, like you could be that Medici.
Thank you so much. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, so storieswisdom.com. That's where the company would be. But on LinkedIn, you can find us as well if you just look at Stories Wisdom.
So thank you very much once again. It's been great.